Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'm going to try that again. I'm high energy. I always tell my students I feed off of your energy in the audience. So I'm going to try that again and see what kind of response I get. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, that's much better. I know that you had snacks before coming to this session, so you should be filled with vim and vigor. I certainly am. My name is Robtel Neajai Pailey. I'm an assistant professor in the LSE Department of Social Policy, and I will serve as your moderator for panel 5 entitled Who Captures Value? AI in Public Services, Markets, and Economic Power. Our panel seeks to understand AI's role in socioeconomic transformation across the continent of Africa, and I'm so very pleased to be joined by a great panel of speakers. Bernadette N. Umutoni is Programs and Partnerships Manager at Amref UK in London. In this role, she works at the nexus of policy, partnerships, and public health, contributing to efforts that strengthen health systems and enhance lives across Africa. Welcome, Berna.
Thank you so much.
Alberto Lemma is Research Fellow at ODI Global, where he leads research on digital and artificial intelligence-led economic growth. He specializes in assessing the economic development impacts of AI, digitalization, and digital trade policy, focusing on their potential to drive private sector development, economic and structural transformation, trade expansion, and inclusive growth. Welcome, Alberto.
Thank you.
And then last but certainly not least, we have Ali Michael Mansoor, who is a senior policy advisor and international economist who previously served as financial secretary of Mauritius and assistant director at the International Monetary Fund. His current work focuses on scaling climate finance, leveraging AI and digital systems for development and advancing coalitions of middle powers to sustain resilient economic systems. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you.
So we've basically got a series of provocations, which I'll be asking the panelists, and then we'll open it up to you, the audience, for Q&A. So the first provocation is, we'll start with Berna. How does your current work relate to AI in Africa?
Thank you so much for having me and Amref. Amref is an African-based, African-led NGO out of Kenya, Nairobi. We work very closely with communities in Africa. We are in 32 countries in Africa. And basically what we do is strengthening health systems at the community level. So our approach to health is bottom up. At the moment, what we've been able to do around AI is linking AI and health at the community level. And how do we do that? For instance, we've been able to work with the Kenyan government, integrating community health promoters work to the national level. So essentially how that happens is they have feature phones that are AI enabled, and they're able to capture, for instance, basic symptoms at their level, at the community level, which are able to flag, for instance, if there's an issue or an intervention is required. So one, we have been able through working with communities, community health promoters in Kenya, to link their system with the national system. And what that means essentially is faster response, saving lives. The other example I could give also is related to a maternal health app that we are currently using. And how it works is it enables community health promoters, and perhaps I should explain what community health promoters are. So these are ordinary people you would call volunteers at the community level, who are not doctors or nurses, but are trained and equipped to be the first line of care, at the front line, in these communities. And why do we need that? Because in Africa, in countries, for instance, like Malawi, where there are huge infrastructure needs, it's difficult, for instance, for a pregnant mother to be able to attend all her antenatal clinics, for the 9 months. Essentially, you have to make a trip to find a community health center. So through this digital app that we are piloting in Kenya, maternal health digital app, we have mothers that are able to stay in touch with the community health promoters to monitor their symptoms, to attend their antenatal care, and follow up with immunization. Most mothers would know in this room, or if you are not a mother, but immunization is quite a huge task, for instance, following up. So through AI-enabled mobile phones, for instance, with these basic feature phones, we see that AI is actually saving lives. And our main message at Amref is, how do we move from pilots to scale? Because we know from where we stand that AI actually saves lives. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Let's move to Alberto. How does your current work interface with AI?
Yes, thank you. There's ODI Global, if you don't know, we're a research institute and we provide policy advice for governments based on evidence. So my work is mainly around the research and on the policy sphere. I've been working on jobs in terms of AI and the impact of AI on jobs in Africa. We're looking at a kind of transition phase. It's not simply about job losses, but also transitioning in terms of what kind of skills that people need and what kind particularly of jobs are going to be impacted in the long term. By about 2030, we're looking at a displacement of about 27 million jobs across Africa, but there is potential for 33 million new ones to be created in services like healthcare, education, and fintech through the deployment of AI. So the real issue is whether countries, I'm trying to look at is whether countries can manage this transition. And related to that is the AI talent pipeline, where I've estimated that there's about 700,000 software developers across the continent, but only 7% of these have the skills to actually work on AI models, like large language models and the algorithms. So there's an issue there about not just looking at not just the capability, what jobs will be displaced, but whether there are jobs can be created within the AI field across the continent. And then I also look at global AI value chains, particularly Africa's place in that, in terms of its access to critical minerals. The continent has about 30% of the critical minerals that are required to produce the hardware that AI runs on, but only captures around 10% of the value from that. So it's actually looking at whether what African countries can do in terms of negotiating better deals, not just in terms of selling the minerals, but also in terms of the value chains and upscaling the processes there. And then obviously, as I said, it's the policy side that feeds into, that this research all feeds into.
Great, I think we'll come back to some of the issues you mentioned, especially the issue around critical minerals. Ali, last but certainly not least, how does your work relate to AI in Africa?
My work focuses on governance and political economy, including looking at deals that elites make that affect development. And in this context, I've drawn a lot on the work of Stefan Durkon, but also the work of Paul Romer on charter cities, and some of the work which David Luke has done on the Africa continental free trade area and the importance of regional cooperation in addressing the problems that Africa faces. Now, in this context, I've drawn specifically on the experience of China with its early special economic zones and Mauritius with its export processing zone. And in Mauritius, it was virtual. In China, it was physical, but both countries practiced one country, two systems. And the idea is, if Africa is going to seize value from AI, I think as Alberto said, we need to find new ways of capturing value. And that means different governance. The same governance which is letting extractive minerals export value from Africa is going to do the same unless we change governance. And this is where the elite deals come in. We need a new deal, and I'm thinking about this in terms of what I call lighthouses of good governance. The deal would be elites can keep taking all the rents they want from the plantations and mines that are already there. They can make deals with multinationals on those. But create a zone which can be inclusive, which can integrate with the African hinterland and integrate the African hinterland into the global economy and into global value chains. And with these zones would be characterized by a different governance structure. You'd have transparent, rules-based governance, which opens the way for a more inclusive model where you can negotiate. However, you also need bargaining power. So the bargaining power would be a network of these lighthouses of good governance. And one way to think about this is look at Dubai. It rose in a very short time from nothing to a major center, based in large part on guaranteeing good governance. It kept its own system, but for the international business, it created an international financial center with its own legal system, staffed initially by experts, by judges from outside to give it credibility. Look also at Shenzhen. We're talking of zones, but these zones need to grow to become major international cities. But what is important is that they need to have transparent governance. And if this is not sufficient, but this is necessary, and the deal would be elites accept they will create a zone where they will not extract rents. I'm not talking of the special economic zones which exist today, which are largely about extracting rents in a different way. But zones where the rules would be different. Think of Hong Kong and China. It's part of China, but it has its own regime. It has its own agreements on international trade, for example. So this is the network around which Africa can seize value from there are four choke points. The first choke point Africa can't do anything about because it's capital intensive, and that's the computation. But the other three, which is data, models, and the distribution, these are the areas where if you don't change the governance structure, you'll export the value out of Africa the same way that the value being exported out of plantations and minerals. But in the lighthouses of good governance, there is a potential to do something different.
Great. Thank you very much, Ali. Lots of food for thought in terms of this idea of new ways of capturing value. And you mentioned something about rules-based governance. I think that's something that needs to trend across the globe right now, because we can see the crumbling facade of the so-called rules-based order right before our eyes. We'll come back to some of the thoughts that you shared earlier. Let's move to the next provocation, which is what kind of socioeconomic impact is AI having on Africa, both good and bad? Let's start with Alberto. Your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, I was talking about the 33 new million jobs that could be potentially created, although there's 27 million that are at risk. But the problem is that these jobs are typically what would be considered as stepping stone jobs to higher productivity sectors in the past. But now these are likely going to be replaced by AI tasks, things in urban formal jobs for relatively paid clerical, administrative, and knowledge-based roles. So these are jobs that would have allowed service sectors to upgrade in terms of value in the past, but now there'll likely be a missing link there that won't help countries that want to develop their services sector to have this stepping stone. In Kenya, we're looking at 2.5 million jobs that are falling into this high exposure category. And in Nigeria, we're looking at a potential loss of about $140 billion in labor income. This is over the long term. More than half the GDP tied to the jobs that are exposed to AI. So there is quite a risk, and it can be quite uneven. However, most workers in these countries are in the informal sector. So these jobs are less exposed, but they're also not benefiting from AI. So there isn't much benefit from in these jobs from the AI revolution. So there needs to also be some kind of discussion about how to integrate the productivity gains for the informal sector. Then we're looking at the infrastructure dimension, which is very important across the continent. No African country has reached 20% AI adoption yet. Whether that's good or bad is debatable, but one major stumbling block is electricity connectivity, where sub-Saharan Africa accounts for about 85% of the global population that does not have access to electricity, and internet penetration is only about 37%. So access to AI models is obviously going to be quite limited from that perspective. So the pattern's uneven, but the opportunity is supposedly quite large, where the digital economy across the continent could reach around 180 billion by 2025. Well, supposedly by this year, according to last year. Sorry, not this year. So the question is whether AI can accelerate inclusive growth or deepen the existing divides is the issue.
Great, thank you very much. We'll come back to rural-urban divide and informal and formal sector divides in a second. Let's move to Ali. Your thoughts on this question of what kind of socioeconomic impact is AI having on Africa?
Alberto, I think, has addressed the big issue. The big issue is how do you replace the jobs which are going to be lost with new jobs, hopefully better paying jobs. But what I wanted to address is more the inequality issue. Danny Roderick and Bill Easterly have done work which shows that new technologies tend to reinforce inequalities. And in the case of Africa, where we have rural-urban divides and where we have formal-informal divides, the likelihood for this to happen is great in the existing governance based on what we've observed over the last 60 years. So it comes back to the central issue that we know that it's very difficult, it's too capital intensive for Africa to really try to do something on compute. But on data, on model, and on distribution, this is where Africa can seize value, but only if governance is changed. But beyond seizing value, this is where I think Robtel's done a lot of work on inclusiveness and why we do or do not get inclusiveness. And we need to draw on that type of work to not, the governance system needs to focus not only on seizing value, but on ensuring that the value is then distributed in an inclusive way. And this goes two ways. It's not only a question of giving back to people who have been left out, but the people who've been left out also are the people who are going to generate value, especially for Africa-specific and sector-specific solutions, particularly in health, where Berna is involved, but also in fintech, especially mobile fintech, and in agriculture. And these are very Africa-specific. Rural, informal play a big role. The big danger is with existing governance, what will happen is we'll just make things much worse. We'll be taking from the people who already have less to give to the people who are well positioned to take more. But with most of the benefits, some of the benefits will go to the elites, but most of the benefits will be exported, which brings me right back. That's why if we say, what do we do about it? Not only diagnose the problem. And I don't say that the lighthouses of good governance is the only solution or the best solution, but we need to start with something practical. And that depends on elites being willing to do a new bargain, which not all countries will do. But it does seem feasible that if the international community were to back this idea up, you could get some governments to agree that they will create a zone where good governance, transparent, rules-based approaches, with everybody having an equal chance. Your education certificate is what will matter, not your birth certificate. What you know will matter, not who you know. If those rules can be applied in a small zone, which they agree, in the same way that the Communist Party was willing to give 4 fishing villages to Deng Xiaoping to do something different, if African elites can be convinced, let's do something different without affecting the rents. They can keep filling their pockets with the deals they make with multinationals everywhere else in the economy. But here where there's nothing, there's no value, let others create the value and share in the value. But that deal, of course, cannot happen with Africans on their own. It will need the international community to work to back it up. And maybe there are better solutions, but it seems to me this is one solution unless somebody comes up with a better one.
Thank you very much for reminding us that, okay, yes, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much, Ali, for reminding us that indeed new technologies tend to reproduce inequalities. The question is, how do we reverse that form of inequality taking place? Let's move to Berna to answer the same question. What kind of socioeconomic impact is AI having on Africa?
Thank you. In relation to what you just said, just to make a brief comment on, you can let the elite get away with whatever they need to. As someone who spends a lot of time working with the communities, I must say that more needs to be done to move the discussion from elite rooms like this to the community level, for us to actually achieve what we want to see on the continent. It is very easy to sit in these rooms and talk about the big ambition, But I hope as LSE, students, you are able to go on the ground and test some of these, interventions at the community level. That is how you'll make a difference. In terms of so far the impact we are seeing, again, this is from pilots, and we are hoping that we can get the resources that we need to scale, But so far, we're seeing improving health outcomes, And for instance, we're seeing that more women who are monitored by these community health workers using these simple, basic digital tools are able to attend all their antenatal care. We all know the critical importance of attending antenatal care. So we are seeing that, which essentially means less mothers are dying, less mothers have complications. 2, we are also seeing that better health comes related to immunization, It's unfortunate that in this part of the world, we are beginning to see things like measles, meningitis, which we never used, we thought back home, we are battling with that. And we're reminding mothers that you need to immunize your child, make sure you come for this appointment. We're seeing that more children are. So in terms of work productivity, we all know that there's a health worker shortage globally, even more so on the continent. With digital tools, we see that there's increased productivity because remember the level of the health promoter, a health promoter is not the level of a nurse or a doctor, but they're doing already so much at the community level. So as a result of AI, we're seeing increased productivity. And then 2, it also reduces the workload for the health workers. Instead of manually doing things, they can now, once it is, an AI-enabled solution, they're able to act faster, spend less time, on data collection. The third one is on strengthening public systems. From the pilot we have done, for instance, at the moment, working with the Kenyan community health worker system at the national level, we see that it enhances, 1, the quality of data, 2, resource allocation, but there's also accountability. It's very easy to monitor who's putting what is needed, who needs what. Finally, it's the economic ripple effects, of health. We know that healthier populations mean higher productivity. We also know that reduced health costs lead to improved household resilience. Again, there's also a link to health inclusivity. The more we have awareness, the more we have mothers, for instance, that understand why they need to access information and know about their health, their children, all that links to economic productivity.
Great. Thank you so much, Berna. And I think your first point about how we need to transition these discussions outside of elite spaces, such as the LSE in this room, into community-based kind of discussions about what kinds of impact AI is having on the community level. So thank you for bringing that up. And I also loved your point about the fact that AI is definitely revolutionizing health access across the continent in really innovative ways. Let's move to the third provocation. You all have been so well in terms of keeping time. Let's give them a hand. I stressed that they needed to have succinct responses, and they have responded in kind. Thank you very much. So then this will give us sufficient time to bring you into the discussion. But let's go to the third provocation. And we'll start with Ali on this one. To what extent is AI widening the rural-urban divide and or the formal-informal sector divide? We touched on this kind of briefly, but please come on in and tell us a bit more.
I think I did touch on it before, and I'd like to start off with what Berna said, which is crucial. Again, if we're talking about value, there are two parts to it. What Berna described is there's huge gains as consumers for the people who are outside the system, and I don't want to minimize those, and those are worth getting. But if we limit it to that, we're not going to get the transformation we need, and we're not going to get a reduction in inequality. In fact, we'll get more inequality, because while these services improve, the benefits are going to go to elites and outsiders, with outsiders probably getting the lion's share if we look at what's happening with other extractive industries. So the challenge is, clearly we want the benefits because it's improving the life of people, and that's important. But we do need the community involvement. But then the question isn't, we need it. We often come up with technical solutions, but we forget the political economy. The question isn't, it would be nice to have community involvement, which certainly I think most of us in this room would agree. But the question is, how do we get it? And this is where I come back. Unless the governance system is reformed, you will at best get what I'll call lip service consultations. Some of you may be aware of the World Bank and the IMF drove this poverty reduction strategy papers, which were supposed to get governments to focus on inclusive strategies to reduce poverty. And I believe, although some might disagree, that by and large this was a failure because there was no ownership. Good technocrats wrote beautiful papers. So again, it was in the world of the ought. This is what ought to happen. But if you're not dealing with the power structures, if you're not affecting the governance, then you're not changing anything. You just get nice declarations and nice ribbon opening ceremonies. So I come back that really one needs to think, what can we do about governance? And there I come back. Over 60 years, the international community, through aid, through international financial institutions, has tried to reform the governance to reduce rent seeking. But the rents are so large, the benefits of share, I'll try to put it concretely. Supposing we have $1 million to share between a multinational and the policymaker who has to agree to what the multinational needs. 500,000 to share each is a lot of money, and maybe it's hundreds of millions, not 1 million. So when large sums of money are involved, I'm not making a theoretical statement, I'm making an observational statement. Botswana managed to have the leadership to not fall into this trap. So some countries in Africa have avoided it. But for most countries, and DRC, Zaire is perhaps one of the worst in this regard, Botswana being one of the best. But most of the countries, even those somewhere in the middle, the elites have not found it possible to resist the temptation. So we need a different, and trying to push them to give up these rents hasn't worked. So what I'm suggesting is a deal where they say, we'll let you keep the rents. We won't fight you on those anymore. But create a place where these rents don't exist. If we don't do that, then sure, there'll be gains as consumers. But in terms of modeling, data generation, and the distribution of AI, all the value is going to make inequality much worse.
Thank you, Ali. Let's move to Berna on the same question. To what extent, and you've talked about this, but if you could maybe elaborate on some of the points that you've made, to what extent is AI widening the rural-urban divide and then formal and informal sector divide in the continent of Africa?
Yeah, I think it depends on how it's deployed. There's a risk in case of concentration in urban areas, well-connected areas. And this tends to be actually what's happening, even with pilots, there's a tendency to just focus on where it is easier. There's an internet, connection or, Yet if you do that, you're simply reinforcing the existing inequality. It's also to bear in mind what rural communities are dealing with. So in case of limited connectivity, low digital literacy, fewer trained personnel, if you're deploying without being aware and consciously addressing these underlying structure issues, then you'll definitely widen the inequality. And then again, we also see that from the community level, if you're able to deploy an AI solution and embed it within the existing function at the community level, that you'll be able to at least address the gap. Yeah. But again, the trend is normally top down. Yeah. What we would like to see to reduce inequality is work with the communities. Let them tell you what they think the solution could look like, and as an expert, you know what to do.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Berna. Especially that idea of embedding AI solutions into systems that already exist and just making them better. Yeah. Alberto, same question. Maybe because Berna talked about formal versus informal, if you could speak to, she talked about rural versus urban. If you could speak to the formal versus informal sector divide, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Berna, between Ali and Berna, they actually talked about quite a few points I wanted to make. So I'm actually going to look at it slightly more from the macro perspective. And in terms of the formal-informal divide, we're looking more about the disruption that the formal sector is facing in terms of what AI does. And I've mentioned that earlier, so I'm not going to go much on that. But there's also the issue that the informal sector might remain stagnant or not grow because it's insulated from AI itself. So as I said, there's no links to the productivity gains there. But I think more from the macro perspective, across the continent, there's the issue that most of the talent is and investment in the sector is kind of concentrated across 4 countries: in Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt. And so there might end up being an imbalance even across the continent between where AI investments occur and which countries can benefit from them. Then there's the issue about actually accessing AI models or any kind of AI tools. In Africa, it costs about 38% of average annual incomes to get an AI device that can access it. I'm not talking about a computer with lots of RAM and GPUs, etc., that to actually run models, but just to access it. $500 will be about 38% of annual incomes. Compare this to North America, where it's only about 1%, Europe 2%, and Asia at most 5%. So even access to use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever is a costly. There's a barrier there. And then finally, from this perspective, is the fact that there's only 5%, even though the continent has 20% of the world's population, only 5% of AI developers are there. And that's where I'm going to go off script for a moment, but that's where the real
Alberto.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
No, that's where the real risk lies, where the capacity to enforce and regulate AI by understanding it is missing, and where the real risk of the data capture is that you can essentially create rogue AI states, because you can deploy AI models anywhere in the world, particularly in countries which have limited capacity to monitor them, even though you might have all the policies in the world, but you can't go to a data center in the middle of nowhere and decide that you're going to see exactly what's running there. And these can be used to influence the data that is captured locally, can be used to influence local elections. It can be used to make geopolitical changes to the benefit of third parties. It can be used to destabilize whole regions, and not just where the data centers are, but also in other neighboring countries or even halfway across the world. Take the Cambodia catfishing farms. They're based in Cambodia, but they target Americans and Europeans. So it can be delocalized. So if the continent does not have the skills to understand, monitor, and regulate these models, there might be a significant, not just in terms of capturing the value, but also the geopolitical risks involved in this. So, yeah.
So going off script was actually helpful in terms of highlighting the dangers that we have to kind of contend with. But I appreciated what you said about there are regional hegemons in the continent that we have to be very careful about reproducing intra-Africa inequalities in terms of AI access and development. So that was a really good point. Let's move to the last and final provocation. I know you're all on the edge of your seats because you want to ask the panelists questions. So I'll ask them to be very succinct because many of you've sort of already touched on what needs to change for Africa to benefit from AI. But if each of you could say one thing that you think is absolutely paramount in terms of what needs to change for Africa to benefit from AI, that would be really helpful. And then we'll open it up to you. So let's, anyone can start. Maybe we'll start with Berna, go to Ali, and then end with Alberto. What needs to change?
I think for me, the focus has to be on solving real problems for real people. Let's focus on what works for ordinary people, because eventually that will make adoption easy. And two, try to improve the existing systems.
Yeah.
You know, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Work with existing systems, improve them, make them efficient, and improve productivity.
Great. Nice and succinct. I love it. Okay, let's move to Ali. What needs to change?
I'll steal some of her time. And since we're at LSE,
You got 30 extra seconds.
I'll also start with ceteris paribus. Africa is going to end up with digital feudalism, by which I mean value is going to be extracted from Africa and exported at the key choke points we talked about, and particularly data generation, modeling, and distribution systems. So unless this changes, this is where Africa is going to go. So what do? I'm going to repeat some of what I said earlier, but the first thing, drawing on Paul Romer's work, we need to have credible rules in well-defined areas where these credible rules, which are going to be applied, and we're not talking just of AI. Shenzhen or Dubai became major centers. We're talking about creating the major centers. There are 1 billion working age Africans who are going to be coming up in the next decade or so. And either this will be a demographic dividend for Africa, or it'll be a demographic nightmare for Africa and Europe. So beyond the issue of AI, we need to have zones where young Africans can be productively employed for the development of Africa. The second thing is drawing on some of the things which Lemma, what Alberto was saying. We need to have the infrastructure and the skills. Now, a lot of people say that Africa lacks skills. If you look at Singapore, if you look at Mauritius, if you look at Botswana, and I'm sure that it applies to many other countries which succeeded. In the beginning, they built their institutions by bringing in foreign talent. And some of this foreign talent in some of these institutions, like central banks or other institutions they set up, stayed for many years until the local capacity could be built. We need to, so these lighthouses of good governance can be zones where you can bring in because Alberto is absolutely right. Most African governments have absolutely no idea how to seize the value at the three choke points which they can act on. So we need foreign talent, but also we need to build it up. And I think, as Robtel would agree, we need to do this in a way that's going to be inclusive. We need to bring in people who are left out so that their capacity can be built in. And this is where also institutions like LSE and others have a role to play. But this building the infrastructure and the skills is crucial for this to work. The third thing is...
Third and final?
We have, if you give me a little bit more inclusion, which we've talked about, unless there are specific policies to address inclusion, it doesn't happen. What to do, I don't know, but Robtel will tell us. But I do know that we need active policies on inclusion.
Great.
And finally,
Finally,
we need
okay.
finally we need bargaining power. One country doing it on its own is not going to work. This is where we go to David Luke's work on regional cooperation and using the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to get the collective bargaining that we need. So what we need is to have lighthouses in as many countries as are willing, where the elites are willing to make the deal, but then these have to work together. So jointly they set up a framework which ensures that value at the choke points stays in Africa and is not exported.
Great. Thank you very much. Alberto, last but certainly not least, what one thing needs to change?
All right. Well, I'm not going to talk about infrastructure and skills because I think we've already touched on that. And plus, these are known issues. Ali already mentioned about the AFCFTA, which creates a single market for digital trade, which could provide a pretty large bargaining chip by creating a fairly large market across the continent. But what the continent needs to do is two things. I think this needs to start scaling up the education to devalue the value of tech bros in Silicon Valley. If there's more people across the continent that have these skills, not everyone's going to end up going to California or whatever just to get a higher wage. And this is a problem we have in Europe, there's in Africa, Asia, etc. So we need to start devaluing these jobs by making them more widespread. And now the second thing that Africa can do, and this is something that the AFCFTA should be evolving into, is that it really needs to understand just how much of the whole critical mineral value chain it can capture. And it really needs to take advantage of the tensions between the USA and China and how they all want to have access to these critical minerals, and that the fact that that Africa needs to be able to play one of these against the other constantly, on a constant basis, so that it gets investments in the country to increase the value, to refine, starting from increased refinement, up to even producing the silicon itself at some point, so that the compute issue can be resolved. And that's what's happened in other parts of the world, but so there's no reason for it not to be able to happen in Africa. But also needs to be able to extract more than 10% of the value of these minerals. And the way to do that is to play these against each other, particularly when you've got easily playable people on one side of the fence. Not so much on the other, but you know.
No, on both sides. Great. Thank you.
China,
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah,
let's give him a hand. Fantastic. So Noor is giving me the 10 more minute sign. Noor, I got you. Don't worry. I know. Okay, so let's open it up for Q&A. What I will ask is that you briefly introduce yourself, and that you make a very brief intervention, briefly. So what I'll do is I'll take lots of questions. I won't be able to take all the questions, but I'll take maybe 3 or 4 all in a row. And I'm going to ask my panelists to remember the questions and to respond to the ones that are most relevant for you. So let's start with, I've just made the terrible mistake of not bringing my glasses. Let's start with you. And then we'll go to that person in the back who has green and yellow. I think it's a blur a bit to me. And then we'll come to you in the suit. And then we'll go to you waving vigorously to me in the back. So those 4, and we'll see how we do with time. And then we'll go for a second round. But Noor is like, Robtel. Let's go with those 4 first. Yeah, so let's start with you.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Hadija. I'm a student at the Department of Sociology doing MS in Equality and Social Science. And I'm from Kenya. And I want to ask this question from part of, literally from chapter theme. And this is, how can we ensure that the economic value created by AI is shared with the young generation, preventing the youth bulge from becoming a source of inequality instead of a demographic divide.
Okay, so how do we ensure that the economic value is shared equally with young people?
Yes.
Who was my second person? Whoever you are, please do speak. Yes.
Hello, hi, my name is Beatrice and I'm a civil servant, mainly focusing on environmental and public health hazards. I have a question in particular for Ali, because I really like the points that he has highlighted. And I wanted to ask if there is any established outreaches to teach the governance and sharing the evidence, or even train policy advisors in the government, like in the policies makers in Africa, so that they can better influence their parties to implement better reforms that are sustainable for them.
Great. Train policymakers. I think you were next. Yes.
Hi, my name is Achu from Ghana, and I represent Esports Africa News. More particularly to Alberto, just want to understand the pyramid. The base of the pyramid is very wide because most of the young people in Africa access AI one way or the other, but in research and everything is being done with models. How can the young people's data or influence be integrated into these big models? Because the solutions that come from the big guys doesn't impact on them.
Okay, incorporating young people in the big models. And I think, yes, you were the last. Next time, you guys need to give us more than 50 minutes. Okay.
Hi, I'm Abbas, LSE alum, now an investment funds lawyer at Kerry Olsen. My question is for Ali. So you mentioned that it's important to influence the governance structures. And you also mentioned the need for a new elite bargain or settlement, or effectively, the elites are left to keep taking the rents, and I quote, from the mines and other areas of values, but essentially to create a new zone where the elites won't be able to extract the rents. So my question to you is, what is to say that once there is value creation in these new zones, that the elites won't then seek to extract the rents from those areas?
Yeah, great question. And then I'm going to take my moderating power and ask Berna a specific question. So there have been these health compacts that have been signed between individual African countries and the UK and the US government. Very, very concerning is data mining. Do you have any responses to how do we reverse that trend? So you all have a question, specific questions, and then kind of general questions about economic value for young people. Can you please respond in 1 minute, no more than a minute and a half? I know that's asking a lot, but please, because we have limited time. So we'll go this way.
All right.
Thank you.
So to integrate the youth in this, I think with having the single market for digital trade and goods makes it a lot more imperative for AI model makers to actually integrate that data, because given the massive youth bulge across the continent, means that they're going to be mainly the consumers, and so if they don't take this into account, then it's kind of missing a gigantic trick. Making them do that, that's not going to happen. They've got to choose to do that themselves, and until there are natively produced models, there's nothing you can do about it. So.
Thanks. Yes, Ali.
There's no guarantee. People make deals, and we've seen that there's some people who are very important in the world who make deals and then they change their mind on it. So that's no reason why African leaders would do the same. So the discipline is going to come, especially this is the importance of having a network. I think you need a combination of peer learning, peer pressure, international pressure, but also if people renege on the deal, if you have a variety of places where investment is taking place, it'll just move to these other zones. So those elites that don't keep the deal will lose out. And for the elites, they're getting the benefit that they're diffusing some of the pressures which they're going to have to face if they don't do this. So I don't say this is perfect, and I don't say it will work, but I think that it has a chance of working from this combination of forces. And in terms of setting it up, I don't think African governments could start up and do it on their own. But I think just by revealed preference, they are happy with the status quo. And so it's going to need external pressure. But this is where I think we can build in, and we don't have time for this now. But Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, is talking about a need for middle-income powers to preserve the benefits of a system which has worked very well in bringing both peace and prosperity to the vast majority of countries. And clearly the architect of that system is withdrawing. But that's not a reason for letting the system collapse. But this is the opportunity for Africa. If new value chains are to be built by middle powers, this is a chance for Africa to lock into it. But the middle powers also need to see that Africa is a key part of that new architecture. And so there's an interest for them to engage with African governments to go there.
Great, thank you, Ali.
There was
And
a
then
question about young people.
Berna.
Sorry?
There's a question about young people. that she
I
asked.
thought Alberto
Are
answered
you-
the question of young people.
Yeah, there's
Or-
no hope. So
Oh no, the hope is sitting in this room. What are you talking about, Alberto? Yes, the hope is sitting in this room. Go ahead, Berna.
I will comment on this in my personal capacity because Amref has a statement on, the US
okay.
bilateral
Okay,
deals.
okay.
So this is just my personal opinion. One, the issue is that the manner in which it's being done, first of all, is problematic because it is opaque. We don't know the details of those deals. We don't know exactly, most people will know about it when it's announced by the US, not even by their own government. So the opaque nature is a problem itself. Two, I think the continent will have to wake up in terms of getting tough negotiators.
Yeah.
Especially in the current global environment where you have a head of state that is using carrot and stick. So we know that countries that were reluctant to sign those bilateral arrangements have had consequences. So it's tough because on one hand you have under-resourced African countries that need US aid, and then you have the US that has its strategic interests because they're saying America First. I think that's what it's called, America First health policy. So it's a problem. But we Africans do a lot of talking. In my view, I think we just need to get to work. Yeah, whether it's in terms of piling pressure on our governments to actually hold them to account. The Kenyans have done so well. We are so proud of you that at least for them, they've been able to, their civil society, forced its way to get, because the government actually didn't avail, what was signed to the Kenyan civil society, but the Kenyan civil society fought so hard and managed to get it, and then we have a court order to this effect. So I think more African countries need to do that. Otherwise, we are simply, to the earlier discussion around data and management, you're just simply handing over the data of Africans to a superpower, and whatever they can do with it, we don't know.
So I think in answer to the question, who captures value, if there's an Africa First agenda for the entire continent, then we will be in a position that we can capture value. So it's been such a pleasure engaging in conversation with Bernadette Umutoni, Alberto Lemma, and Ali Mansoor today. Let's give them a hand. Yeah. Thank you so much, Berna, Alberto, and Ali, for finding time in your very, very incredibly busy schedules to join us today. I'd also like to publicly acknowledge the LSE Africa Summit Team 2026 for all their hard work. Yes, absolutely. And then last but certainly not least, to our audience, we're so thrilled that you could join us for this very important discussion. Stay safe, keep well, take care of yourselves and each other. Goodbye. And I'm really glad that we ended on time, Noor. We did well today. Yeah, so let's give us a hand as well. Thank you very much, everyone.